Rick is going to talk to us on markets for transport, eliminating congestion through scheduling, routing, is that correct?
Yep.
And real-time pricing. So thank you so much. You're coming all the way from Cornell, where you're the director of the Cornell Program of Infrastructure Policy for 12 years?
Almost 13.
Almost 13, yeah. So you're welcome here. Some of the people will be Jim Mattis, for example, is up there on the screen, and other people around the table, but we're looking forward to what you have to say. We'll interrupt you.
Yep. Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to stand up because I project better.
Okay.
But if that affects the microphone for the people online, let me know. It's great to be back here. I was actually a national fellow here in 99, 2000, over in the other building. This building did not exist at that time. So it's really wonderful to be back and to see friends. I saw John Cochrane not too long ago when I was visiting, and I said, Professor Cochrane, it's great to see you again. I'm Rick Geddes. You taught me macroeconomics at Chicago. And John said, gee, I'm sorry. to see people again. I'm sorry?
He never says that to us.
I'll bet he doesn't. So I've been here since mid-September. I'll be here through the end of May. I'd love to take advantage of being here physically and meeting as many people in person, buy you coffee as possible. I do want to give a shout out to Professor Josh Rao and the State and Local Governance Initiative that is hosting my visit. I've done a few sabbaticals. I don't think I've ever been made to feel so welcome as being right in the middle of that wonderful team and hosting my visit while I'm here. And it's really a nice sort of plug-in for me to have that instant group. And of course, the infrastructure work that I do is mainly a state and local issue because they're the owners of the infrastructure. The federal government actually owns relatively little civil infrastructure. They own a ton of military infrastructure. And we can talk about how that's going to affect our road pricing plan in a minute.
Funds a lot of the capital, but then it turns it over to the states.
They do through gas taxes on gas and diesel fuel that are per unit taxes. And there's other things like truck tire taxes that we could talk about. I do want to say a thanks because I think this sabbatical worked in the sense that I was able to clear my mind of administrative work. People know Cornell, it's big red. We call it big red tape. It's very bureaucratic. You get sucked into committees a lot. Students are wonderful, but they soak up a lot of time too. So you need time to clear your head. And I think that the sabbatical worked in the sense that I was able to clear my head and sort of refocus things. And I think I convinced myself of the importance of this type of work that I've been doing with two esteemed co-authors. And you may know Peter Cramton, who was at University of Maryland for a long time and is now down in La Jolla, working on the consulting firm a new effort actually. It was Peter Cramton Associates that I'll mention. But this is a series of papers we did a few years back that focused on one, proud to have a short paper in Nature, but the longer paper published in JITE, and several co-authors. Well, I don't know, people know Kara Kokelman at UT Austin Civil Engineering, but she does a lot in this area. And I suggested you read the final working paper. We got some coverage in mainstream outlets like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. But the point is I kind of like to read, you'll notice this is a little dated. I'd like to pick up this work again as a result of this sabbatical. I think it's become a more salient issue in some ways, and I'll explain why. So that's very exciting, and I think a productive outcome of the sabbatical. Many thanks to Hoover for hosting me here once again. I have an ambitious agenda. I might get bogged down a little bit, but I wanted to use this talk a little bit differently to try to motivate things. And this is a result of reflecting, on this issue and traffic congestion in the Bay Area and sort of how we got to this position. So I'm going to maybe use you as guinea pigs to a little bit to talk about some of the benefits we have of high mobility that the automobile and the truck have given us for hauling freight. But we've gotten to a point where it's kind of disruptive and there's some big social costs. And I wanted to launch a vision, if I could, for a new thinking about a new structure, a new system for the transportation network. And I say that because I think I'm pretty certain the technology is ready. So in the times of earlier commentators on this, there was a technological barrier to the adoption of real-time network-wide road pricing. That's no longer the case. I want to embed that in the intellectual background of this, which is very Coachian in our ideas. And of course, we have to talk about William Vickery in this context, coming from Columbia. You have to do that. And we use mainly the structure of wholesale electricity networks under the control of an independent system operator or an ISO to clear the market in wholesale power in a real-time basis as a template or a benchmark or a model for thinking about how that network might work in road pricing, in transportation. And we'll see how far we get before John cuts me off.
You already got one.
Very ambitious. Another John, yeah, go ahead.
10
Wow.
topics I noticed one missing that I just want to invite you to comment on, which is the political economy of it, in the sense, congestion pricing, we're all on for it. And look what a disaster in New York.
Yep.
That now in part because they sold it, they sold it as this is going to save the climate and fund the MTA. And I said, I don't want that. On the other hand, San Francisco, we actually have real-time tolling. I never thought but the poor people can't, whatever. So, and carbon taxes are, just a grand failure of selling something to people. So how to get people to sign up for it, I hope to agree to it, is I hope part of your thought.
So I guess, John, I'd like to separate the economics and policy from the politics, if I could, and kind of think about that's the most difficult challenge. To say to people about New York congestion pricing, you say it wasn't a political football, it was a political Super Bowl, right? that became so political, and it has been over time. I think I'll get to this if we have time, but I'm not expecting this idea to really take place first in the United States. First of all, we have pretty polarized politics, you may have heard. Second of all, we have a lot of legacy infrastructure. So just drive around, you'll see, and I'll get to that in a second, based on the automobile, right? And a lot directing the driver by line of sight, road signs, line paint, yield signs, all of this stuff that I'm going to argue is obsolete. So it might occur first in a place like the Middle East or in Africa, where they don't have a lot of that. And also our third problem is that we have a balkanized ownership structure. So the road network is owned by a patchwork of states. The interstate highway system is completely owned by states, no federal. But then we have local streets that are owned by municipalities. We also have county roads. And so to coordinate all that in a road pricing sense with an ISO up above it is a bit challenging, to say the least. So I think the political economy might be a little bit better in other countries where you could use those as test beds than it would be in the US. Anyway, I know that's a cop-out, but let me think. Oh, and there's also ways of making compensation, right? We'd automatically think about how you're going to use the revenues from this, and people who operate these dynamic toll lanes confidentially, public owners tell me it raises a lot of revenue, right? It's very valuable. Willingness to pay is high. So how you use that to get the buy-in of various political groups is maybe something we could chat about. But that's not my
self-driving
point
car.
here. Sorry?
The self-driving car.
Yep.
So we're going to be able to sit in the back seat and read our manuscripts.
Yes.
So why do we care whether?
So can you hold that for like 2 slides, maybe 3? Because my other benefit of being here in the Bay Area is I got to take a Waymo, and it was a revelation, right? So hang tough, and I'll start with some history here. We'll start at the beginning. And the beginning, I wish Oliver, well, Oliver's not here, but my co-author Axel Ockenfels is in Cologne now. And this was in Germany. So this is an auspicious year, 2025, for many reasons. But first, it'll be 140 years since what we in my world accept as the invention of the modern automobile in Mannheim, Germany, by a guy named Carl Benz. And you might recognize that name in automotive technology, Benz. Yes, it's the same guy. So that is what we consider to be the first sort of series production car brought into service. It shares a number of commonalities with the modern automobile. It is steered by the drivers holding a steering rod, in this case, by line of sight. It had an internal combustion engine. It was put in series production. I want to focus on the picture for a minute to motivate the talk, because if you look at that picture, everything we've done, and I'm using we in our species, humans, have done for the past 40 years are just changes to that basic fundamental design from Carl Benz. What have we done? It's a tricycle. It has 3 wheels. We added a 4th wheel, okay? We added a passenger compartment. You can actually drive one of those replicas, I think in Stuttgart, where the Mercedes Museum is. It goes pretty fast, so it's dangerous. So we added a passenger compartment. We added much more powerful engines. We added a better braking system. We added a collapsible steering column, padded dash. We added a trunk, and we added a lot more bulk to it that you'll see out on the road today. But that is the basic thing. The other thing that's even more important, roads and cars are strong complements. So we've added a huge system around the world of roads for that thing to drive on, made of concrete or asphalt, that go everywhere, and they have traffic signals, and they have stop signs and yield signs and everything else to allow you to take that on a trip from point A to point B. One of my subtexts of the talk today is to suggest that this surface transportation sector is really ripe for disruption in a main way, and we can't, well, maybe that's too normative. I don't know, we shouldn't be in a position of just continuing to build that out. We've added lanes, interstate highways. People around here know that. People in Los Angeles know that even more. And we've had some problems with this. I do say, though, and there's a compliment to the automobile, highways. So I tell my students that they should study infrastructure for their careers. Of course, I want to see them get into this area, but I say, one of the reasons you should do it will give you an attitude of gratitude. One of the most beneficial things in life. You will understand infrastructure and be grateful for the infrastructure that our parents, grandparents, some cases great-grandparents built, that was really a lot of work to build and has given us unprecedented mobility that people 100, 200, Harold.
Back on that a little bit. I mean, if you imagine the cities had grown the way they did.
Yeah.
We didn't have the automobile, we would still have horse-drawn carriages, right? And we'd still need, roads to drive those on. I mean, we maybe would have looked slightly different, maybe more attuned to horses rather than cars, but
they don't go as fast, right? So
that's true. I mean, I like a car more. I mean, if that's the point, but I mean,
we would certainly have some roads, but I don't know if we were still riding horse-drawn carriages, we would have built that. Oh, the clover leaves. Point well taken, Harold. I take your point.
Manure. Well, there'd be a little manure problem.
All right, let's go on.
That's
guys.
true, disease. I'm not blaming Carl Benz or the car, or we know Daimler was his buddy, and it evolved into Mercedes-Benz. But so I'm saying we should be grateful for the mobility we've had for a long time that people a couple hundred years ago could only dream of. I'm going to drive down to LA today. That would have been crazy to say a few hundred years ago. However, I submit we're at the point where pushing this basic model has caused some pretty serious social problems. The first, that photograph could be anywhere in the United States or in the developing world, and you'd see basically the same problem. The INRIX is kind of the keeper of the data globally on the costs of traffic congestion. And it just came out not too long ago. I was interested to see that the US and Germany match each other for the number of hours per year lost, basically a full working week in traffic congestion. I was also interested to see that the United Kingdom beats us, if you want to put it that way, in terms of hours lost to traffic congestion. A couple of things, there's a cottage industry of literature on this. I guess we could argue about how clean the identification is and so forth, but finds pretty convincing evidence intuitively that traffic congestion is closely related to a number of negative outcomes besides just lost time and fuel and et cetera, frustration. Worsens air pollution. As we know, there's a lot of evidence on fine particulates from diesel fuel, PM 2.5, which your lungs cannot filter out, that is bad for you. So there's a lot of bad health outcomes, increases in obesity, divorce rates, et cetera. One thing to note about this, I think, is that for a long time, and particularly in developing countries, this problem has been growing worse. So as countries develop, one of the first things people want to get is an automobile, and they want to move off the farm and into the city. So they want to, you have greater densification and you have worse traffic congestion. Peter, yeah.
I'm thinking about this picture and thinking another problem is that maybe the cities are too big and there are
Cities are
distortions
too-
that produce that, right? Like you get mega cities that emerge in developing economies, for example, because that's where the government is.
Oh,
And so you need to interact with them, right? And so it may be that thing, you're saying that road network is messed up, but it may be the systems of cities that are funneling people into places that are too congested.
yep, could be. Of course, my mind is wondering to what degree is that due to the mispricing, specifically the under unit pricing of road use? And that is, I think, a core problem that drives a whole bunch of distortions. I'll get to one of my favorite Vickery quotes from 1963. But John, yeah,
Yeah, time wasting traffic is endogenous.
I'm sorry.
It is endogenous. It's also the fault of zoning laws.
Yeah.
If people could live near work, they wouldn't be driving in the first place.
Yep. And I think that's a good point.
Can I partially rain on this parade for a second, please?
I'm sorry.
I'd like to partially rain on this parade for a second.
Okay.
We've adopted so many things inside cars that allow you to do things inside your car that you couldn't do before. You're really not losing all that time because you're doing other things. Let me just finish, okay? And in fact, the studies that have tried to look at the shadow value of an hour spent in traffic congestion are well below wage levels. They're like half the wage rate. So something's going on. So I'm not saying it's not a problem. I'm just saying to lay out all the costs without saying that we've partly endogenously adapted to this with lots of things inside the cars, with our use of technology, be able to be on the phone while we're driving in traffic congestion, listen to music we prefer instead of wasting money on a concert, et cetera.
Yeah.
All those things. So I think that's just kind of a useful kind of corollary to what you're doing.
Yeah, I wish I had brought in the data on that, but people in my world had hopes that technology inside cars, like increase airbags, stronger protections against rollover and so forth.
Yeah,
which
safety is a big issue. I'm just talking about the value of your time.
I know,
spent.
but that's related to this, right? And that's caused a lot of distracted driving.
Well,
And you can see
absolutely.
people on the highway doing this, and that has resulted in higher fatality rates on the roads than what we had expected, given some of the technological improvements in safety of the vehicle itself, right? So I don't
Fair point.
disagree, and I've heard estimates of half the wage as well, but it hasn't come. It's not free, right? Of trying to be productive while you're driving is a
Fair
challenge because our brains can't
Yeah,
multitask that
my
way.
only point is we ought to net all these things when we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway. Yeah.
Rationing with time is inefficient compared to rationing with money. We're all economists.
Okay. I point well taken, but let me get into, here's just a quote on air pollution. And again, that could be anywhere in the world. Air pollution, traffic congestion, 83 nations of the United States contributed 2,200 premature deaths. So hopefully we're all in agreement that there are pretty negative effects from traffic congestion. Health is one. I know living here that people consider this area to be pretty congested in terms, it is the Bay Area, but it doesn't meet the top 10 in terms of places from the recent INRIX data. And this gives you some flavor for the social losses associated with traffic congestion. There's certain things like stress and frustration that I don't think INRIX includes in the data set. So these may be low estimates in some sense. Anyway, it's growing. The other thing is, of course, motor vehicle accidents, deaths. And again, this gets back to the issue where there was a hope that it would decline, but it still is pretty high. So in terms of 2023 data from the National Safety Council, a very high number of people continue to die. And of course, injuries aren't included. It's easier to measure deaths because you have a death, and that's pretty clear. Injuries should be added to this. Death rates peak around 20.2 per 100,000 population per year for 21-year-olds. And again, when you're 91. Okay, leading preventable cause of death for every age group from 5 to 22. I was surprised about the very young children who were dying in traffic accidents. Second leading preventable cause of death for every age from 20 through 67. Those are numbers.
What's the
I
trend line over
struggled-
time? Can you show us a trend line over time?
I can in a second, yeah.
And that number does not seem particularly high relative to historical
One that's
numbers.
kind of, hang tough again. I want to, maybe people can give me advice on how to put a human perspective on this. And my dear friend Barry Strauss, who is now a fellow at Hoover, is a historian. And we were talking about the Vietnam War recently and how it was a 10-year period, and the people from his and kind of my generation had a sense that there was it was a quagmire, a lot of deaths. It takes us about 16 months to kill the same number of people on our roads who died in the Vietnam War. For younger people, maybe they think 9/11 was clearly a traumatic day. A lot of people died. It takes about 24 days, okay, to kill people on our roads. So we have all these safety devices. We have all the bulk around the passenger compartment and so forth. There's a literature on this. But my point is that to the degree we think reducing congestion through real-time network-wide road pricing reduces traffic congestion, I'm going to argue increases the adoption of autonomous vehicles and thus reduces traffic accidents. It's a good thing to promote. One of the interesting things from the data on congestion pricing in New York City, very limited time when it was implemented, was the reduction in pedestrian car accidents. People from New York know it's very much a pedestrian city. So if you have the less congested traffic, you have a fall in injuries associated car, pedestrian, and it was something like half. So it was traffic congestion does cause more accidents. Yeah.
Because the cars are moving a lot faster. So I would expect the cars in New York aren't going anywhere. It's moving a lot faster when you get rid of the congestion. So it's not obvious that.
No, there's offsetting effects, so we netted out, but what we observed for
Yeah,
that
it's
short
really
window, I admit, of time, was a reduction in pedestrian harm. So this is the fatality rates per 100 million miles traveled, just up to 2020. I thought this was interesting because COVID. Yeah, Mars.
Can you compare this to other forms of transportation?
No, I don't have time today. You and I can chat about that. If you think that would be useful. I mean, transit's obviously going to be more safe than in your own. But if you mean bicycle or something, that would be interesting. I just thought this was interesting because people again thought that when everybody was sort of in lockdown during COVID, there would be a reduction in this, but people kind of went out and went joyriding, and so they, there were actually more, per mile driven, an increase in the risk associated with their driving. So it's very psychological. I just thought that was interesting. And we have seen, again, I'll try to in future talks, get something to indicate the increasing effect of distracted driving and people trying to work while they're driving. It's one thing if you're in the back seat, but if you're the driver, that's a problem. I want to argue next that we're at a pivotal moment in technology that has changed since the day of Carl Benz, okay, and that we're now in a situation where, and even since Vickery's time, where we're now in a situation where it would be possible technologically to address many of these problems through the allocation of the use, to John's point, use of road space through variable unit pricing of road use. Those changes specifically are autonomous and driverless vehicles. Waymos, we could all take a bus and take a Waymo up in San Francisco now. It's level 4 autonomy, where it still has a steering wheel and has a brake and has all this other stuff that's going on. Its own level 5 would be to get rid of all of that, and I guess you just have a big red button that says stop or pull over. But we have, it's amazing, right? I urge everyone to do this, sometimes thought one of the best things we could do with our subsidy money for transportation is buy everybody a Waymo ride, so that it takes you about 5 minutes to adjust to that and realize it's a better system. And then you can really work and be productive, and even if you're in the front seat. The other thing is location technologies. This gizmo can, in real time, whether you like it or not, figure out your location in the X, Y, and Z plane to the sub-meter level. And that has gotten much more important. There's also this discipline I like to read more about called kinematics, which is the study of an object's motion in space without so my arm is causing my phone to move. Physics would normally study that, my arm pushing the phone, but kinematics just studies the movement of an object in space without reference to the force that caused the object to move. You might think that for real-time road pricing, that would be very important. Also, I want to include alternative fuels. I'm not saying electric because I think there's a consensus that long-distance heavy trucks do not work well on batteries because the batteries become too heavy at some point. The alternative, I include hydrogen in that. There's just a sort of a revolution going on in alternative fuels. Developments in
Just before you go on
Yeah.
with that, again, in the spirit of netting, electric vehicles are generally heavier.
Right.
And the evidence now is most smog type particulate matter is coming from tire wear, not from engine.
Yes.
And
I
so
saw
they're,
that.
they're worsening smog. So when we net all this, we need to, take
Oh,
down that.
you mean because the added weight?
Added weight causes greater wear on the tires, which generates more matter.
Yeah.
per mile driven.
Yeah.
So I think there's been an obsession on just what comes out the tailpipe, not looking at things from end to end. And that is very dangerous. For example,
I'm sorry, could you say the?
there's such an overemphasis on just what comes out of the tailpipe.
Yeah.
Electric vehicles are clean. Well, where are the batteries produced? How dirty is the production of
Yep.
batteries? You have to dispose of the stuff. You got the wear and tear in the tires. So, and I think right now, if you look at a fairly high mileage gasoline powered car, it's about end to end about neutral with respect to electric cars and carbon emissions. Now that'll get better as a larger fraction of electricity comes from lower carbon intensive fuels. Just want to get back to netting everything to be clear.
Yeah,
about the policy.
yeah. So that, just to be clear, that's why I use the term alternative fuels instead of electric, because I want to.
Hydrogen right now, you can't get a permit to go under a tunnel, through a tunnel or over a bridge with a hydrogen powered automobile.
We need to
You don't
think
want
about the
Hindenburg
policy.
blowing up on a bridge or in a tunnel. So
Yeah, also my
hydrogen is a lot more combustible and flammable than gasoline. So I'm not saying those are impossible to deal with, but you know, several of us here were advising Arnold when he was governor of California. He was big on a hydrogen highway, and we're no closer to hydrogen highway than we were in 2008. So just FYI.
Yeah, and hydrogen trucks, I think, I understand there's problems with hydrogen. It's a small molecule, doesn't like to be stored. It's hard to transfer, it's hard to pipe it. Anyway, we could talk about that, but I think, so this is part of my thinking on the future. Yeah.
Also, if you want to save the planet, not everything has to be zero emission. There are a few great use cases for fossil fuels, long distance trucks and airplanes.
Right.
What's everything else? But there's also two other things that you may have on later bullet points. Real time, every single parking space ought to be charged for.
Yep.
Not just charging for moving, charging for parking. And the other thing is the possibility, which hasn't come to, most cars sit idle 98% of the time.
Yeah.
Why do we have to own a car? We should be able to, not just summon a Waymo, but rent cars without all the transaction costs of Hertz, which are enormous transactions costs, and therefore not have to own, or maybe own one and then rent the other one. Or, that would also help the parking and dramatically reduce the capital
I
invested
agree,
in
John.
cars.
So that's a couple of slides that, the question, John, that I had, the interesting estimate would be how much would your overall transportation costs be reduced if we could flip a switch on the wall over here and switch to that system versus what we have? Like, would it be half, of our costs now of owning a private automobile that sits in your driveway and you pay insurance, which is higher because of all the accidents and
Well, it depends on how many costs you get to shift onto others. If I have to pay for my parking, all of a sudden, the incentives to not own so many cars rise.
Yep. So hang tough. Let me,
Costs including shadow values, yes.
yeah, well, I don't know if it's for Peter's benefit, but I have to include developments in market design. We're here at Stanford that that assist with thinking about how this would work. And in fact, I'm not going to show the website, even though I have tried policy developments. We have the ability right now to implement transparent, efficient pricing in transportation. Peter just got back from Bangkok, where he was helping the Thai people to set up their spectrum auctions, and I think electricity as well. And he created this new entity, I guess, out of his old firm called Forward Market Design, which has a team that is ready to do this. The platform is built, maybe a little bit of advertisement for my buddy. Platform is built and available, open access, open source, and any country that wants to try this could get help and assistance and advice with Forward Market Design. So in the interest of space, well, Shelby's here from CAVNU visiting. Thank you very much. Correct me if I'm wrong, but basically a 40-mile drive. So this is about innovations that are occurring that are very important in thinking about the next generation of the surface transportation. I'll leave aviation out. Surface transportation system, basically between downtown Detroit and Ann Arbor. It's along Interstate 94. As part of it, I think, I know the people, both the CEO and Carl Reichout, who works with Tyler Duvall, who's the CEO, opened in July of 2024. And I think I can just advance this and it'll play. So here we go.
At CAVNU, we are building the world's most advanced roads. CAVNUs are dedicated lanes that enhance connected and autonomous transportation, making travel faster, safer, and more accessible. Our infrastructure will enable vehicles to talk to each other. CAVNU will improve how vehicles collectively perceive and react to their environment. CAVNUs optimize public transit with the efficiency of dedicated corridors, letting you travel safely, quickly, and autonomously. CAVNU, building the future of roads.
So doesn't that have the same problem that trains have? They go from one place to another, but what do you do when you get there?
You mean with this particular? Yeah.
Well, a driverless
so the
car
lanes
can take you to the last mile.
What's that, John?
A driverless car can take you to the last mile.
Yeah, the driverless car would solve that problem.
But then why do you need this? If it's a driverless car, why can't you use the roads we have? Why do you
Well,
have to have-
I view this as a step toward that. I mean, this is revolutionary in the sense that they have dedicated lanes on an existing United States interstate highway where you have to get permission from, in this case, Michigan DOT to do that and to run these tests where the infrastructure is talking to the cars is something, it's a bit of a holy grail in this world. Is called VII, which is Vehicle Infrastructure Integration, to make this happen. The other thing you'll notice from the video is something called platooning, where you get the vehicles to be very close together without an increased risk of accidents, which is a human thing, and therefore you make better use of much better use of the available road capacity. I've heard of estimates up to 50% more vehicles throughput, vehicles per lane mile per hour could get through when you have that sort of platooning effect in there. But if I were to be able to pull the lever on the wall, I would, of course, price the entire road in real time and eliminate the traffic congestion by having real-time prices fed into an app like Waze or Google Maps that would tell you the way to go, based on road prices. So and that would, I think, address your problem. Harold.
Someone watching this, I couldn't help but think that this is the lead into a major Hollywood disaster movie.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
You've watched John Oliver, the commentator. He has a hilarious segment on infrastructure. And the first part of his segment is about how Hollywood loves to blow up infrastructure. Like creatures from outer space come, and the first thing they do is just destroy our infrastructure. I don't know why that is, but it's true, John.
Caltrain the other day. The other
Happens before.
use of that is to be able to use railroad right of ways. You can't really use for a road now, but boy, could you use it for that thing.
Yep, and
Too bad
any
we
right
just
of way.
spent $27 billion to put electricity on Caltrain.
Getting right of way, is a big issue, and that's another reason for doing what Cramton, Geddes, and Ockenfels are arguing for pricing in real time. Okay, John, here's the inspirational vision. So I know I'm wanted to show this now. Agreed. It doesn't. You can use fossil fuels. I'm not, attacking fossil fuels, but I do see this innovation
Whatever
going
makes
on.
sense.
What's that?
Whatever makes sense. It may not be fossil fuels 20 years from now.
Yeah, it may not.
Yeah, it may not be fossil fuels down the road. We'll just have to see.
Okay. So I'm just using the term alternative fuels, which I think is a lot of innovation in power. I think I want to sort of divorce the transportation services from the fuel used. I maybe could talk about that a little bit. I don't want to get too much time on that. There is innovation going on in the way we power vehicles right now, and I think that's very interesting. In the upper left, the blue one is CAV, connected and autonomous vehicles. I can promise you that there's innovation going on in that. There's like the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, Tesla, Google. I mean, they're all working hard to increase the feasibility of more autonomy. And that will, I am pretty convinced, reduce that fatality rate that we see today, disproportionately young people, who are dying on our nation's roads. So the engineers are pushing out on both the yellow and the blue. Where are we not seeing as much innovation? Well, with all due respect, it's us. It's us economists, right? All due respect, the PhD economist in the room is working on the feasibility of pricing road use in real time, network-wide, just like a utility.
Let me sort of elaborate on this. So it
Please.
seems to me that once you have autonomous vehicles, the value of time changes dramatically, as Michael was saying, that you can use your time for other purposes. So therefore, the costs of congestion decline, and also congestion will decline because autonomous vehicles can be bunched together, as you've already said. So why doesn't that just solve the problem by itself? What problem is left?
If more people say, oh, I can go in my driverless car and spend 3 hours commuting, I don't care, the amount of congestion could skyrocket. It's not obvious.
Unless
Maybe,
you price the road.
maybe, but I'd rather be at home on my sofa.
It's still a better world if we, like, I don't think people say, gee, I love being in this this
Better technology is
enclosure.
always better. Yes.
What's that?
Better technology is always better. Move
Better
the frontier
technology. It
out.
moves the production possibilities. May have learned that in graduate school.
So-
Yeah.
so
But I think these things are strong complements. That's kind
Not-
of my takeaway. I think that if we could get the real-time road pricing right, and part of the takeaway is from our work is we don't think it's that hard to do. It's hard politically, to John's point, but technologically not that hard to do. It would push the adoption of more connected vehicles. Yeah, go ahead.
Now, we have some examples and some history in the Bay Area. And it was pretty clear for a long time they weren't following our basic optimal pricing rules. First, we had HOV lanes, which were mostly empty, and there was greatly increased congestion in the remaining couple of lanes on the highway, which clearly can't be optimal. And now we have some real-time pricing, which you're advocating, and there's some in Washington, D.C., and et cetera. And that's probably a step forward, but it's unclear that the pricing is being done properly.
Yep.
And so it's not just the economy of getting people to adopt it, but it's actually doing the right pricing
Yep.
and the confidence of the people. And when you're talking about a vast move to autonomy and all that sort of stuff, and being very close together, I'm sure they're getting it really, going to get it pretty darn good for you and the vehicle in front of you and behind you. But somebody has to be paying attention to the whole system.
Yep.
And that's going to be some government employee somewhere. I don't know, your equivalent of your ISO, whoever
That's
happens
good,
to
right.
be. But that makes me a little nervous. Paul Milgram, Nobel Prize winning economist in our department, I was working with the FAA on an analogous problem of air congestion for aircraft. And he says he's built a model that's got 130,000 constraints.
Oh my God.
Now, from here to San Francisco isn't going to be 130,000, it's maybe 1,000.
Right.
Okay, so I'm just trying to figure out who's going to get all those shadow prices right, who's going to get it all organized, even if we have an autonomous vehicle that won't bump into the car in front of us or
Yeah.
the car behind us.
That's the role of the independent system operator. You're right about that. And that's the role it plays in wholesale power markets. And there's an organizational governance structure for that we talk about a little bit in the paper. So I think our benchmark model would be what happens pretty successfully in wholesale power markets and see how that could be transposed into surface transportation. I don't disagree with anything you said, but I think that would be, I'd lean heavily on that.
I think it would be really, really beneficial if you could look at the sensors and the traffic patterns where we're using real-time pricing right now, for example, Highway 237 in the South Bay.
Mhm.
I think that would be an interesting
Yes.
comparative case for you to look at. You know,
Why is this such a hard problem? I thought that's what markets do. And so if you just raise the price until cars are going, you're set. You don't need to solve this huge planning.
no, well, actually, it's more complex.
Can I give personal evidence on this? Because my house sits on a dynamically priced highway. And here's what I do. I look at the price, and if it's over $2, I know somebody in the government office screwed up and it's a parking lot. So it works very well in certain normal situations, but anything goes wrong and the constraints get violated and all things go wrong.
Well, part of it is, I guess, you don't yet have futures prices. See,
Well, there's
spot
no
price, you
future
get on the
prices,
road and now
exactly.
you're screwed.
Exactly. Something like a crash happens or something like that, and they don't deal with it well. And then it screws up the whole thing. And then you have to be an experienced driver on this road to know, there's been a crash.
Forward markets are coming up. But John, this gets to this is your point, is if you think about the over in the middle, you would, in the future, it's nice to think about the future. You would, and I think we, the economists, need to offer an inspirational vision of how we can add to social welfare. And you could pay for a subscription service where you're paying for transportation. And an autonomous vehicle could come to your house when you have to commute to work. Maybe it has a couple other, maybe it's a small pod with other people in it. And it would go, and we have the technology now. In the evening, it would go away to some other parking space, maybe recharge at night. And you would just pay for that service monthly, right? And my guess is, it'd be an interesting thing to really get into, that would, your overall transportation bill would be much lower than owning your own vehicles that sit in your driveway all the time. So that's kind of what.
Let me just add, we're trying to be constructive here, so don't take, I think more or less all of us think that this could be a big improvement.
Okay.
Question is, in the real world, what will happen? So I think we're trying to be constructive. Don't take this as criticism of the idea. Take it as attempts to try to be useful
I appreciate that.
Improving.
So let me go back to my autonomous vehicle. The great thing about the autonomous vehicle is that you don't have to change too much of the legal structure or the governmental structure. You don't have the same political opposition that you have to congestion pricing. The one thing we know about congestion pricing is that it's extraordinarily hard to implement on an old infrastructure. If you're building a new lane or a new highway or something like that, you can do it. You did it actually with the Pennsylvania toll road a long time ago, but it was a new entity. So once you have a system in place, which was free, people are not going to want to pay for it. That's what's happening in New York City, and it encounters this resistance time and time again. Now, the thing about an autonomous vehicle is that even if nobody else adopts it, you benefit from it yourself because you can use your time for other purposes. And as more and more people choose to do this on their own, then you get social benefits, you get spillover effects. So you can see a political process that can lead to general adaptation, but I don't quite see how you're going to get congestion pricing at scale in an old infrastructure in a legacy infrastructure, which we're gonna have for another 100 years at least.
Well, that's,
That's a political objection, not a technological.
yeah, and that gets
Well,
my
that's a,
point, my answer to him.
you know, we used to have something called political economy. When did the economists decide they didn't have to talk about politics?
I'm,
You're also, I think you've given them too early. So thinking of congestion pricing, how did they sell it? They said, this will save the climate and we'll pour more money down that literal rat hole called the MPA. If they had said instead, we're gonna clean up congestion in New York and we're gonna cut your taxes, that might have had a lot better chance of getting somewhere.
and John, they would have, instead of saying $15 an entry, which was the original proposal, now it was 9, but heaven knows what's gonna happen next. But that 15 was not driven by the optimal price that's gonna clear the, it was driven by the MTA's revenue needs.
Yeah.
Right, so that.
Now identifying the political issues that come up every single time you talk about congestion pricing. People want to take that money and use it for other wonderful good things,
Yeah.
like saving the.
But let me say that
Yeah.
my response to John initially was that I don't expect this to take place in the United States first. I expect it to be in a place where where there's not a lot of legacy infrastructure, and some other places are like Hong Kong, Singapore are more open to these ideas, and then those will be test cases where you can see how this works. And then maybe we'd be last. I don't know, but I don't disagree. The other thing I'd say is that I'm curious about whether if you just have a transportation bill and you're in a connected and autonomous vehicle, if you have less resistance to road pricing, if that's just a cost of you using your transportation service, right? It's less salient in some sense. And would that enhance public acceptance of road pricing? I don't know, but I think that's.
You're getting behind.
I'm getting behind, sorry. Okay. Key insights, connected autonomous vehicles, alternative fuels. Value of progress is limited if those vehicles are stuck in traffic. I'll stick by that. Progress needs to be made in this area. That's call for further research. And I do think that free flow traffic and autonomy are likely to be complementary values. Okay, just a simple analysis of this would say, here's one of my favorite infrastructure facilities is the New Jersey Turnpike at 4 a.m. Basically, you have free flow. The market clears in some sense. There's a marginal use of cost of use. Demand is relatively low. The supply curve is relatively inelastic because it's hard to change capacity for infrastructure in the short term. Visited the Golden Gate Bridge. They do have a reversible lane on the Golden Gate. So incoming, obviously, you want more lanes in the morning coming into the city, but it's pretty inelastic. And then this is not to scale, but when demand shifts out at 8 a.m. for the New Jersey Turnpike, we would think of that as a shortage of road space or colloquially traffic congestion, right? But the key thing with traffic congestion is layered onto that is something much more profound in some sense. This is Herbert Mooring, who's a famous guy in this. Added complexity. Uses of road and other transportation networks not only experience congestion, they create it. Deciding how and when to travel, they take into account the congestion they experience, but not the negative externality they impose on others. And this is highly nonlinear. And we've all seen this driving around a little bit. Social costs go up at an exponential rate once you hit some critical level of traffic congestion. The term gridlock was created by a New York guy named Gridlock Sam, Sam Schwartz, who talked, it happened in New York City at one point. So we all kind of know this as on the horizontal vehicles per hour increases, but then you hit a critical rate, or critical rate of throughput, and the travel time and congestion costs go up exponentially. And that's actually a pretty profound graph. Tell the students again, they're used to looking at it from left to right, where it goes up, but it also works in the opposite direction. So if you can shave 5-6% of the vehicle, and the morning peak is more sharp than the afternoon peak. If you can shave 5 to 6% off the morning peak with accurate pricing of road use, with John's point, both spot and forward markets that tell you the direction of change in prices, then you can ride down the curve and get back to free flow traffic without too much difficulty.
And your argument about the pods is it flattens.
What's that?
Your argument about the podding that could
Yeah,
reduce the effect
yeah.
is that it flattens that curve.
Absolutely. You mean platooning?
Yeah.
The platooning, yeah,
referred
yeah,
to it.
sorry.
Sorry, my
The actual
apologies.
curve is backward bending. The freeways, you get the maximum flow through at about 40 miles an hour. And
Yes.
And then if you try to put one more car, it all goes down to zero. So that actual vehicles per hour goes down to zero.
Yeah,
So
that's-
the problem
I
is
Yeah,
you're able to make the nose of that thing move out a little bit, but then you say you got now 10 times,
yeah,
you get maybe a third more cars per hour, but still you get to that point where put one more car in, boom, it all stops. and that's the
Absolutely.
end of it.
I should probably, that's real simple. I should probably put that on because you're right. And that would be the gridlock where it just collapses, right? And you have to unstuck.
I read a great paper on this. Freeways, it's, people, how tightly do people go? So like if you're going 65 miles an hour, people then will slow down, but get closer to each other. So if you add more cars, you can just slow down and get more cars per hour. I think 45 is about the amount where you're not going to get any closer to the car in front of you. Now you add one more car, we slow down to take care of one more car, boom, it all stops.
This stops, yeah. That's future versions of this, John. I will do that.
I mean,
That's a
there's a
good idea.
difference in demand for traffic per hour and actual throughput of traffic per hour. Your supply and demand graphs had that problem too. More people want to go through hour, but
They can't, yeah,
they can't.
yeah. No, I have seen those graphs. I'll put that on.
It would also be instructive I have a long list of attempts to use markets from my own experience.
Okay.
I'll say something at the end, but right now, there are two that I think are relevant. One is we've tried for a long time to get the bridges to use congestion pricing.
The bridges?
Bridges in the Bay Area.
Oh,
across,
I didn't know
across,
that.
across
Okay.
the Bay, across the,
Yeah, it's just $8 no matter what time of day.
yeah. So that's been a dismal failure. I mean, testimony at hearings, et cetera, people nodding, and it just, the price reflects their maintenance costs and their projected
Yep.
maintenance costs, nothing else. And then the biggest fiasco was high-speed rail, which is now blended speed rail and probably not even gonna get built in the Central Valley, was sold on the assumption there'd be a massive increase in congestion on California's roads.
Oh, yeah.
They're predicting 60 million people would be living in California in 20 years, stuff like that. And this was how it was heavily justified. If you actually look at the data, they were projected to decrease vehicle miles traveled by 1% in the state. And maybe that 1% is what's at the peak of congestion. But
I do.
so
I do
there's
have a
this
slide
there's
that
this
we can
problem.
hang tough.
There's this problem of something sounding good, and then actually when you get down to it, how it's actually implemented.
Yep.
Being at
yep.
violent odds with economics.
So I do have a slide, well, I think it will address at least the first point you made on the use of markets in different contexts. But we have to talk about Vickering before that.
Yeah.
And I did go back and read the May 63 AER paper, and this is the beginning, right? I begin with the proposition that no other major area's pricing practice is so irrational, so out of date, and so conducive to waste as in urban transportation. Two aspects are particularly deficient: the absence of off-peak differentials and the gross underpricing of some modes. So the gross underpricing is road space, and that leads to lack of exploration of other modes. You could write this today, and it would be equally true. So that's my point about disruption needs to be made both in surface transportation, both in policy and in technology. So Vickering was really a visionary. Maybe
Could I just add one point about the intellectual history?
Sure.
So the original important paper about marginal cost pricing was by Harold Hotelling in the late 1930s, number one, and actually in economists in general was Marcel Dupuy in France about marginal cost
What was his
pricing.
name?
Marcel Dupuy in France about marginal cost pricing of utilities, especially electricity.
So just a footnote, I've had some emails with Ed Glazer at Harvard, who we all know and love, and he's doing some intellectual history of congestion pricing. Alan Walters, who worked with Margaret Thatcher, actually wrote, according to Ed, a lot of this up first, and wrote. I'm going to go back and look at that, but I'll ask him about Hotelling. I don't know if Ed has written it up, but Vickering gets a lot of the benefits, and he also. So here I just have put the benefits on demand side and supply side. And it really, I think simplifying consumer decision-making down to one price is really, really critical. and you can include, externalities. And of course, to Vickery's point about optimizing across modes is really important. And I think just there's a whole bunch of margins. If people knew the price and they knew the direction of price change for the use of the road via forward markets, that would be revolutionary. So you know whether you should wait 15 minutes, have a coffee, answer some emails, and then go, or should you put your pants on and go immediately as fast as you can. We don't know that because of the uncertainty associated with travel time. Harold.
So why isn't a natural starting point not really a fully Gaussian perspective where we say we all have already property rights to drive on streets as of this point? We just endow people with that. We use license plate readers in lots of places to just measure on which road you're driving, right? So it's really easy to determine these days, where you're driving when. And then people just, sell and buy these rights to drive on the street. Now, how would you do this? You do this on an iPhone, we create an app and there's trading taking place. Then you probably put in your preferences of time versus money and your app will solve for you the problem when you can drive and at what price.
You're reading my mind.
This is the political conversation.
That's exactly because some people would get money.
You can make money on this. Sell your right to drive.
You can make so much money. I do want to emphasize the supply side. You absolutely agree. I'll launch some ideas about that in a couple of slides with my remaining time. So I wish I had time to go through these. One of the two things from this, technological innovation is not occurring as fast as one might hope, in part because you don't have pricing of road capacity. If you had this and it was, real business, I think it would, you'd see a lot more innovation in this space. And again, that gets to my point about Carl Benn's original invention. The other thing that I think is really important, Adam Smith wrote about how spending on infrastructure tends to get politicized. And it's a famous quote. I put it on my syllabus for the students to read back in 1776. Probably before that, the time of the Romans, infrastructure spending was being politicized. Finally, we could say there's a market signal as to where you should put the next dollar of capacity. Where the price is highest in the peak, that's where the next dollar of investment should go. It takes the politics or reduces the politics in spending on infrastructure. And I think I'm jumping up and down about that because I think it's an underappreciated benefit of network-wide.
Yeah, I obviously have to jointly maximize capacity and pricing and usage, right? So same thing in electricity generation, same thing in anything else. You want to build more power plants, you want to decongest.
You will not escape the political problem of equity.
So
every time this topic comes up, then some people say, but this is inequitable. Okay. So how do you go?
Do you want to go to the equity slides or do you want me to?
Go on.
I mean, I understand equity. So let me, what's that?
Get through this slide.
Let me march through. Okay. So coasts, right? For those who aren't living and breathing coasts, I've boiled down coasting ideas on how to solve a property rights problem into 3 easy steps. Okay, first, clearly define use rights to the use of the resource. To be clear, I'm not talking about selling the roads. I'm not talking about privatization. It's just a use right. This goes back to the time of the Romans. I'm doing the Latin right. It's ius utendi. And that is the Romans understood stripping out a use right from the actual property right and having that. Tradability, there's the Latin for making it tradable. And then you have a market. Once you have a market, you have prices. And I think there's a consensus here. I hope that we like prices for directing resources. The third step is once you have the market, is to try to make the market more efficient, try to make prices more accurate and transparent. And that is a huge benefit. Maybe this is Mr. Boskin's point. There's a whole bunch of examples that we don't have time to go through today, but where Gaussian analysis has been applied in various contexts with varying degrees of success. I understand the electrons moving along a wire is different than cars moving along a road, but the economic principles are pretty similar. I like this stuff. I think about individual transferable quotas to address the commons problem of fishing in off Massachusetts, for example, have been pretty successful. Radio spectrum auctions we're probably familiar with. Tradable permits for sulfur dioxide. That was when we were burning dirty coal, and nitrogen oxide emissions and cap and trade had some issues over time. Ray, who was just here, he just left, wrote a paper with Eddie Lazier. The last time I was here, I used to ride on the back of Eddie's new BMW motorcycle and hold him around the waist as we went up and down 280. So I thought it quite important to mention both. He worked with Becker on a 2013 paper when they had this worked out, and then Karok wrote a working paper more recently on immigration slots. So kind of
Let me interject here for a moment, since when John and I and Dick Smallensee were the CA, we put the emissions trading into the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990.
Great.
And to let you know what was involved, EPA didn't want to administer.
I'm sorry,
The EPA did not want to administer what the president decided. So I had to get the president to take all the power away from the EPA to price it, to cost it, and issue a statement of administration position that he would veto any bill that cost more, as scored by the CEA. And the way we kept the cost down is the administrator of the EPA signed a document agreeing to 10 different things that would basically move towards sensibility, including allowing a futures market.
Yeah.
New source review wouldn't require every factory to go to best available technology if they repaired a pipe, et cetera.
Yeah.
And that's the state of my office. Now, for a while that was done, and it turned out that reduced the cost of compliance by Schmalensee and Stevin's estimates, I think by 55%.
Yeah, it's a good.
So it's a good example. There are a couple of others. There's another good example, which is I did this for NASA on trading different characteristics of experiments on unmanned space probes. Because what used to happen is scientists would build their stuff and fight to get on, and they had no mechanism to trade characteristics to get more stuff on each flight to reduce the cost. And we got Caltech to run that. It worked for a while. The first time it was used was on Cassini, the probe of Saturn. Two that didn't work, California water. We had a drought when I was at CA. We brokered actually pricing water briefly. And the next year there wasn't a drought and there was no consensus to continue at a lower price. Okay, just FYI. There was a strong objection to pricing. And the other one was trying to get two governors of California, talking about congestion. It now takes the median bachelor's degree at the Cal State University system is 6+ years. And the UC system is quite a bit longer than it used to be. And the big problem is they can't get a course for this major, et cetera. So we tried to get the university system to wheel units so you could take a course at San Jose State rather than San Francisco State if you needed it. And there was just immense hostility to that. So there are times this has worked and times it hasn't. I don't know if there's anything that can be learned from that. I haven't drawn any general principles other than you keep trying and you try to get higher than Shaq's free throw percentage as economists.
Kind of would like to get a catalog of these things, so maybe you and I can chat offline.
There's also a book called Better Living Through Economics that John Siegfried, the Secretary Treasurer of the AEA, put together. It has a bunch of these things in it.
Okay, I'll take a look, yeah. Just to close the loop on the auctions of airport takeoff landing slots, Tyler Duvall, who's the CEO of Cavnu, was at the USDOT in 2008. And when they were trying to get this, it's actually the slot through the air that is the constraint implemented. And there's challenge. I'm not minimizing the challenges with this. So let's just quickly go with how this might work, where we use an independent system operator as our benchmark or template in energy that plans the market. And it's very simple in its mandate to ensure the safety and reliability of the electric system. It uses markets to allocate wholesale power. In case you don't have the map of the ISOs in North America committed to memory, here's what it looks like. I was surprised to see that my state of New York ISO is its own, kind of like Texas, which we may remember a few winters back when they had the meltdown and they don't interconnect with other states. I was also surprised to see California ISO is pretty much in there, but within the borders of the state of California. The other ones, you can see how big the ISOs are. They're going across states. They're huge. Mexico, has its own. They're just very massive grids that are being managed with wholesale markets that update every 5 or 10 minutes the price of electricity. So this would be the idea. I'm not suggesting that this would somehow map into a transportation network. And again, I'm not suggesting that this would take place first in the United States, but it does give us some idea for how these things successfully operate for very large grids where you have a market for wholesale power. So
are you gonna say something about retail pricing? Because we had a disaster in California. We got Governor Wilson to deregulate electricity, but they only deregulate wholesale, not retail.
yeah, I remember that.
And we had big problems because of that.
Yeah.
So are you gonna say anything about that?
No, because I don't want to talk about power too much, but this would be the retail customer in transportation would be fed the prices that are coming out of this market, and whether it's wholesale, retail. So I don't want to get too much into the electric thing. It's just
We're hoping there won't be any,
we're hoping
there won't be any regulation of those prices that is non-economic.
No, we're hopeful that the ISO would have the freedom to let those markets clear. So we create road slots, use utendi, right, which are the right to use a particular section of road, maybe, I don't know what interval, maybe a lane, mile, over 5 or 10 minutes, make those, create a slot market that's tradable. And this prices the use of the road network. It's really profound. And you have both spot and forward markets. I can't think of a situation where forward markets would be more valuable than knowing currently what is the future price of the road network going to be. So you know whether you should rush to work or whether you should wait to in your travel decisions to face a lower price. Yeah.
What do you do when there's a crash?
When there's a crash?
I bought my right to travel to San Francisco at 2:32 p.m.
Yep.
And then at 2:20 p.m., boom, someone's crashed on.
Yep.
So
So with all due respect, John, I think we're probably all familiar with a road network that is undervalued because it's not priced. So I can't tell you the number of times I've been on the DC Beltway, for example, and there'll be a fender bender. There's a backup that lasts for miles. You wait, there's rubbernecking, and you get there, and there's like 3 or 4, whether it's police or whatever. I'm not talking about a fatal accident here, right? And the delay, the cost of that delay is tremendous compared to the resources that are spent in clearing the accident off.
I'm totally with you. I just wanted to know how.
Okay.
I mean, one thing you could do is just spike the prices.
Yep.
Something goes off in your car and says, why don't you pull over and not, take the next exit and get off, or I just, how do the prices react?
What Waze does exactly that.
Yeah, but
So
this would go through the price, and so get off at this exit,
But
right? If you just had this information.
If you think time is a price, that's exactly what it's doing.
And sometimes, so Waze has so many people coming off, you're more congested following Waze. I've had that experience too.
Let me quickly.
But again, if
I
it
think
did
we're on the
it
same
right,
page.
it would incorporate that.
Absolutely.
Finish it.
Okay, so let me just say that what we're saying is not radical in the sense, I mean, it is radical, but it's an extension of current policies. I have to give a nod to the state of Oregon that a number of years ago in 2015 implemented Origo, which is a network-wide road per mile road charge instead of the state's gas tax. It's like 2 or 3 cents per mile, but the key is it's network-wide. And it was the first RUC, road usage charge program in the world, from what I am told. The problem is they're flat, but there's about 60, I think the number's correct, price managed lane corridors in the United States. If you were to take those two concepts and mash them together, you would kind of sort of have what we're trying to do. John,
You gotta be a little worried about, so we would all have some object that reports to the government exactly where we are at all times, and it charges us appropriately. And I'm a little worried about having some object that reports to the government exactly where I am at all times.
It's already happening. I think I'm sorry. And I actually, I have so I kept my slides on equity because of his question. But when I talk to young people, they don't seem to care about their privacy anymore. So I took those slides out. But there's kind of a cottage industry in that. Well, the prices would be fed into the USO that would clear the market. The information would be deleted. I know nobody believes that. but it's kind of like
Your
the
vision
USO is a
is-
big computer, right?
About the technology, your vision is, you carry some object with you, it tells you exactly where your car is at all times.
Yep. So anyway, I'm not gonna get bogged down in the USO. This is how the integrated, if it were just the independent system operator dealing directly with you as a user, that's the simple integrated market model. That's probably not gonna be the model that we observe. Service providers, SPs, would come in and they would integrate, they would work with the end user, offer you, say, a monthly plan and for road price usage, and they would deal with the independent system operator. They might have an interest in hedging. They could be big road users that might do this, like United Parcel Service, FedEx, Amazon, DHL, United States Postal Service, and so forth. And they would operate like this. So you, the user, would not have the complexity of dealing directly with the independent system operator. You'd be dealing with the service provider. I don't think I missed anything. So the key, of course, here is we would create forward markets that not only reveals prices, the market's expectation of where the prices are going, but also mitigates risk over time. So this is Peter's interpretation, John, of how this would look on your app. Notice that this is a month. So this would be Peter is when he's at the University of Maryland. Suppose he has to get to Tyson's Corner from Maryland for a meeting at 9 a.m. and he wants to buy a road use trip, and so he's buying the month here, and you can see that the forward prices are telling you if you go later, you wait 20 minutes, how much you're going to save. If you leave earlier, how much you're going to save in brackets. So that's the key price signal that is getting to users. And then, as we know, people are going to adjust on a whole set of margins as to how whether they want to call their buddy who's next door, who commutes, and say, hey, let's commute together today, whether they want to take their bike, whether they want to wait, whether they want to take the train, blah, 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 on down the road. So this obviously identifies you. Peter called it forward transport. And this is what it would look like on your app.
Sell these? We're gonna have traders that buy and sell.
Absolutely, John. Of course, they're going to arbitrage between.
A lot of it is about how soon.
In Chicago, I know the commods, man. Yeah.
Typically, I would think, if you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and say, I'm gonna buy my 9 a.m., not everybody else is out there, so the price is gonna be low.
Yep.
So a lot of it is not just about when you drive, it's when you commit to when you're gonna drive.
Absolutely true.
That game now with airline pricing.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm sorry, you say that again?
Except
Now with pricing airlines, when we decide to book a flight for a trip we know we're going to take in advance.
You're absolutely doing
you can't buy it and sell it, so.
But there be
there'll
people
a market.
arbing, John, across these different markets, and in the paper, I don't have time, but talking about how we think the forward markets would work and how far in advance
No, you need to
lock
allow
in.
the arbitrage, right?
You'd absolutely do. This is your current map. Yeah, Nick.
Could you say a little bit more about how the initial allocation would be done? Because it can't be everyone has a claim to the same thing. You
Yeah.
have to have some people have the initial rights to
I
that thing,
haven't-
and then they sell
No,
that. So how-
I would like to, but I have to think about that some more.
Sure.
Because in fishing, ITQs in fishing, that was a huge issue. It's a huge issue in radio spectrum, right? And I don't want to just shoot off, Nick, without thinking about it some more.
Yeah.
So if you, it's a weak answer, but
Everyone has a right to call them points. Everyone has a right to 100 points or
yeah.
$100 worth of stuff on
And
there.
there's probably a literature, but it might be in civil engineering, but can I get back to you? It's a great point that I need to think about.
I think it's an important point, right? I mean, of course, we could start with a concentric circuit.
Yeah.
Probably people that live further out, they drive a long time on the road to reach the inner city. So in some ways, right now they have more rights to the road than somebody who lives already downtown always uses a bike. And if you start with an equal distribution, implicitly redistributing from the implicit property rights that people have right now.
But the
So I think
counter
this is a
argument,
super important
but the
issue.
counter argument to that is the people who live closer paid more to live closer.
Yeah, in
And-
terms of taxes. But I
Well,
mean,
no, but for
implicit-
the price of the land, for example, itself, and therefore
I think
Yeah,
you're sort of
now that you say
screwing
that-
them for the decision.
When
they
you
make.
said that, Harold, I think Kara Kuckelman at UT Austin Civil Engineering has written, because she's written on credit-based congestion pricing. we haven't said anything about the use of the revenues here, right? And her idea is to credit it back to people. And I think she said the initial allocation could be based on like your last year's driving mileage or something like that. I'd have to get back. It's a good point. Let's just put a hold on that. So this would be the commute today, where you have red and yellow, and you have a wide variation in travel time is uncertain under current unpriced road space. And this is what it would look like if, so the point of this is that it's relatively easy. Nothing's easy in life, but you could integrate this into current apps and get to something where the user interface would be relatively simple without a lot of pain, okay? Notice that this one identifies you. It's vehicle, Maryland 012. You're identifying your vehicle. Notice also that it gives you a price, but it gives you the direction of price in the forward markets. So the price is going up, gives you a hint, but notice that it's blue, right? You're paying for the certainty through a price signal. So these are the comparisons of the two situations.
It looks only superficially nice, but this reminds me of in Chicago, the prices for parking your car, downtown went up massively. When Mayor Daley sold the rights to the parking spot, for the Olympic game financing. Never mind the background, but it's now a lot more expensive to park your car downtown Chicago than it used to be, which I think is great, because if I go downtown, there's always an empty parking spot. I don't mind paying for it, but obviously people for whom this really matters now will be loath to go to downtown. They probably hate the high prices. So there are people driven off the roads here, right? They're no longer, stuck in traffic, and they have to sit at home because they can't afford taking the road.
Yeah, so that's
it's back to your equity point in many ways.
Yeah, so let's equity. I was trying to I'm going to deal with this in 2 minutes. So obviously rich and poor benefit from free flow market. Congestion is regressive. Okay, you could go back to the New York City again if you want to use that example. You see buses and et cetera stuck in traffic with very uncertain travel schedules because of the traffic congestion. Traffic congestion is not good to lower income people that rely on public transit. It seems like this is overall Pareto improving in that all users benefit from improved travel time, and the poor have the option. They also see prices, and they have the option of switching to less expensive travel times. So they're going to benefit from the additional certainty. The other thing about this that's weird is I've had people say, well, lower income people commute longer to work. So this is going to be a regressive tax. The rich live closer in. That it's a different world that you're talking about, because different roads have different values, right? And we're just not used to thinking about that. It becomes more difficult of an exercise to predict the distributional effects of real-time road pricing in a network, because the road prices are going to vary with value. So it could easily be the case that richer people currently travel, maybe poor people travel farther distances, but richer people travel on higher valued roads. So the effect of congestion pricing like this would be progressive, in the sense that they lower income travel. People travel.
Poor people get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and drive to work. Rich people get up at 9:30.
Good point. So they're going to have a lower. Yeah, I hear that they have more shift work, so they have to be there. They don't have as much flexibility. So I'm trying to respond to that.
This is
to that
all
criticism.
John has become our resident sociologist.
There remains the issue that people don't see it that way.
Okay.
People see the equity problem in a different way in the political world. That you can't impose this on poor people. That becomes the issue that defeats this politically. It's not that equity can't be thought through, but you can't win. It's very difficult to get a consensus unless you can give sort of a break to those, like we do with utilities.
The revenues.
So those people who don't have much money can purchase their
their electrical, Rich NIMBY's whine about the poor people. The actual poor people have often very different opinions.
That the rich, poor people support this and surveys, or they support, not this, but they support dynamic lanes. Okay, anyway, I'll just point you to finally a paper presented at the AEAs. Joe and our group pointed me to this by Cook and Lee studied the district. It's not network wide totally, but it's dynamically priced highway toll lanes. And they find that it's actually progressive, right? Relative to the world is number of highway lanes are all free. Status quo tolling, which is dynamic tolling, increases aggregate welfare, benefits drivers in all income quartiles, driven in large part by the option value. Moreover, we find that drivers in the bottom income quartile gain the most under status quo, which is dynamic tolling. Anyway, I'll just conclude by saying that lower income groups are also going to benefit from this market information and facing the trade-offs and simplification of decision making. All right. Anyway, hopefully that addresses equity.